Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse. You're on the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, looking at life through a biblical lens and generally solving all the world's problems in 2 hours or less. I want to talk to you a little bit about antidepressants. Do you take a pill? Do you go to a psychiatrist, a doctor? Does he give you antidepressants? If he does, you're one of 30 million Americans that are doing that. More than 250 million prescriptions are written for antidepressants every year. And that's just the antidepressant. That's not all psychological drugs. I don't know how long it's going to go before we recognize that we have a serious national crisis on our hands. Americans account for 5% of the global population. We consume more than 50% of the pharmaceutical drugs. If we're not depressed, then why are we taking so much antidepressant? The truth is, we are deeply depressed as a nation. And there are many of us who have decided to medicate ourselves, often with alcohol. 60 million people abuse alcohol in the U.S. Another 22 million abuse illegal drugs. Why are we so unhappy? We live in the most prosperous days that any human being has ever known. We live in the most prosperous country that has ever populated the earth. We have it all. Well, we're depressed to some extent because of the breakdown of the family. The only two countries that have a higher divorce rate than the United States are Belarus and the Maldives. We also have the highest percentage of one-person households on the entire planet. And this sort of thing leads to a tremendous amount of loneliness, frustration, rethinking life, hoping, wondering. According to a Pew Research Center survey, only 51% of all adults in the United States are married, and those are not all happy marriages. We are also more isolated than we have ever been. Our wealth, our technology have allowed us to become isolated. Nobody sits on the front porch anymore. People don't really know their neighbors. There are neighborhoods where that does happen still, but generally speaking, it doesn't happen. A century ago, 4.52 people were living in the average household. Now the average household only consists of 2.59 people. That's about half. Where'd those people go? When you start seeing these numbers, it starts making sense why we are so deeply depressed. There's a reason these people don't want to live with each other. And then the loneliness that kicks in. Fewer Americans are ever choosing to get married and start a family. The numbers are getting higher all the time. Thirdly, we're seeking happiness in all the wrong places. Sex never made anybody truly happy, ever. Our jobs, source of all sorts of problems. Satisfied today, look out next week. Popularity, fleeting. Babies, they grow up to be noisy, dirty, expensive propositions. Security, fleeting, elusive. Popularity, we talked about that. None of these things produce happiness, people. We might feel satisfied, we might feel peaceful in the face of some of these for a time, but it's not permanent. Let some negative event enter and our happiness goes right out the window. The author of this piece says, in the end, what we are all craving is love and connection. And it's because we're created by God that way. We've been created to love and to be loved. And when we get away from that, is when we start to get into trouble. That's what the song says. All you need is love. Of course, if you feel as though there's not enough love in your life right now, ask yourself how much love you have been giving to others. Love is not a one-way street. People who need people are the happiest people in the world. It's generally the people who give the most love that end up receiving the most love. If you endeavor to become a person of great love, you will become happier, not only during the holiday season, but during every other time of the year as well. Studies show kids who spend more time chatting on social websites feel reduced satisfaction about all parts of their lives, except for their friendships. That research came from the Institute of Labor Economics. Looking at a national sample of British children between the ages of 10 and 15 collected from 2010 through 2014, the researchers found that spending an hour a day chatting on social network reduced the probability of a kid being completely satisfied with his or her life overall by about 14 percentage points. Children might have been exposed to cyberbullying. To me, that is an amazing diagnosis. How can you be bullied in the cyber world if you don't stay there? Shut them off. Go away. Stop listening to these people. Don't watch them. Shut it down. Nope. Stay right there. And they put terrible things about me on their Facebook. What are you doing reading their Facebook? Well, my friends told me. Get new friends. Stand up. These people had less time left over to do the other things that would have improved their well-being. Or they may have made comparisons about their lives against others they don't even know. And why does any of this matter? Because childhood experiences are important in shaping how they'll succeed as adults. So focus on those activities and attitudes that are about giving, not about receiving. Social media exposes people to the emotional side of life without balance. It's not productive as much as it's destructive of happiness. Speaking about the kinds of things that are addictive, drugs and friendships and fears and all the rest of it, for more than 2 years now, Lance Crowder had been having severe abdominal pain and vomiting, and no local doctor could figure out why. Finally, an emergency room physician in Indianapolis had an idea. The patient said the first question he asked was if I was taking hot showers to relieve myself of the pain. And when he asked me that question, he said I basically fell into tears because I knew he had an answer. And the answer? Cannabinoid hypernemesis syndrome. They call it CHS. And it comes from heavy, long-term use of various forms of marijuana. And for unclear reasons, the nausea and vomiting are relieved by hot showers or baths. They'll often present to the emergency department 3, 4, 5 different times before this thing is sorted out, Dr. Hurd said. He's an emergency room physician in Colorado. Dr. Kenan Hurd co-authored a study showing that since 2009, when medical marijuana became widely available, emergency room visits diagnosed for CHS in 2 Colorado hospitals nearly doubled. In 2012, the state legalized recreational marijuana. Doesn't hurt anybody. It's certainly something, the doctor said, that before legalization we almost never saw. Now we're seeing it quite frequently. My question is, when is inhaling smoke a good thing? Oh, by the way, recreational marijuana measures passed in 4 states this year. You ever hear of George Washington University? Well, George Washington University is dismissing George Washington. George Washington University in Washington, D.C. has apparently decided that giving students more flexibility means freeing them from taking required courses in U.S. history, even if they're history majors. This is more silliness from our academicians. The department eliminated requirements in U.S., North American, and European history, as well as the foreign language requirement. So it's now possible that a student can major in history at George Washington without taking a survey course on United States history. Do you know why that is? Well, according to the College Fix, the new requirements allow for students to take an optional course in previously required courses or a high score on a placement test to opt out of the requirement. But the mandate to take U.S. history is no longer in effect. When I lived in North Carolina, they did this sort of thing, or at least tried to. The state education department, run by a bunch of liberals, wanted to establish American history courses in high school that began after Reconstruction. Now, for those perhaps who were educated in the public system, after Reconstruction means after the war between the states, and after that 20-year period, it starts somewhere around somewhere in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That's where they want to start American history. Why? They don't want to talk about pilgrims. It's that simple. They don't want to talk about Constitution. They don't want to talk about all of the important foundational elements that made this country what it is. They want to get away from all of that. They want you to know about the terrible people in the South who had slaves and the wonderful people up north who came down and rampaged across the country, destroying everything in sight like a bunch of locusts, so that they could change this thing. They're the heroes, and the other guys are the bums. And they want to start after the politicians got a chance to set up a more progressive environment. Slavery is an awful thing. There are no words to describe how bad it is. No words. The Bible condemns it. Every thinking human being would condemn it. But in the early days of this country, it was everywhere. All through South America, all through Europe, all through the Middle East, all through the East. Slavery was everywhere. It was kind of a mindset. The slaves coming out of Western Africa, only about 20% of them came here. All the rest went to the Caribbean, they went to South America, all down in that area. And it was the Muslims who were selling them to us. They didn't sell them to all of us. They sold them to a relatively few people in the South. They had crops that needed intense labor that they couldn't afford. This was easy. They even found Bible verses that seemed to say it was okay. It was terrible. But you got to understand, it was a cultural phenomenon. People were doing it. Nobody thought of it as that bad. But it was horrific. And we're glad it's over. But there's more than one way to enslave people. Don't teach them anything. Keep them in the dark. Manipulate them, and you've got slaves. These people don't want George Washington or the Founding Fathers or anything like that taught, because it would then explain the foundation of this country and why we have the laws and the rules and the standards and the Constitution and all the rest that we have. Those are pesky little things that stand in the way of what the progressives and the liberals want to accomplish here. And make no bones about it. Don't ever be confused. It was the liberals who had the slaves. In the South, it was the Democrats who were the slave owners and who fought tooth and nail to keep it from going away. Isn't it amazing? George Gwinnett College in Lawrenceville, Georgia, 118 students in 2006, more than 11,000 students today. That's huge. 10 years. A Christian student prevented from sharing his faith at Gwinnett due to restrictive and subjectively applied free speech rules has filed a 76-page lawsuit against 11 named college officials. He is permitted to speak to students about his faith only within one of two free speech zones that comprise 1/15,000th of the 260-acre campus, about 30 square feet, after submitting his materials for approval 3 days in advance. So you can't just walk up to somebody and start talking to them. And then for only a maximum of 18 hours a week and only twice in a 30-day period. This student first ran afoul of the policy when he attempted to hand out literature and speak with willing listeners about his evangelical faith on the plaza in front of the campus library. Despite positioning himself so as not to interfere with foot traffic, he was stopped by college officials who informed him that any such activity on campus required a permit. He was also told he would need a permit to approach anyone to privately share his faith. Question: does the First Amendment guarantee a student's freedom of speech and religion on campus or just off? Do students check their constitutionally protected free speech at the campus gate? WorldNet Daily says the situation on college campuses is worse than you could ever imagine, and America's future is at stake. They apparently have prepared a forthcoming report entitled "No Campus for White Men" by Scott Greer. If this were an anti-Trump or anti-religion issue, would the college still be as restrictive? Inquiring minds want to know. A New York author has a radical idea to improve education. He wants to return genuine knowledge to the classroom. Saul Stern, who is a New York scholar and author, writing in a recent column for City Journal, said that the best option we have for improving education in America is returning genuine knowledge to the classroom. The existing K-12 school system, including most charter and private schools, has been transformed into a knowledge-free zone. It's now producing the dumbest generation ever, to borrow the title of Emory University professor Mark Borland's 2008 book. In The Dumbest Generation, Borland showed how digital social media stupefies young Americans, makes them less interested in serious reading than any previous generation. Add in the educational establishment's refusal to teach knowledge in the classroom, and the result becomes a toxic mix of intellectual apathy and ignorance. According to Stern, this decline in knowledge began midway through the 20th century when education experts began to emphasize the importance of child development and personal feelings rather than the acquisition of facts. Read liberal. In the nation's education schools, future teachers were now instructed that children were capable of, quote, constructing their own knowledge, end of quote, and that the classroom teacher should be a, quote, guide on the other side, end of quote, rather than a sage on the stage. Most elementary schools concluded that it was more important for children to learn how to learn than to accumulate mere facts and useless knowledge. I want to know, there any adults left in our education system?